Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Whispers of the Deep. My name is Draken. Today we are looking at Chapter 22, Aeril 6. So, Aeril 6 is the end of Aeril's plotline before the interlude. This is a not fairly long chapter, but a incredibly in-depth chapter. Out of all the chapters I've written so far, this is one of my favorites and one of the ones I had the greatest amount of enjoyment writing. It was a chapter I was looking forward to writing for literal months. Anyways, for a brief synopsis of Iroh 6. Iroh 6 follows Iroh over the month of his recovery after his fall off the mountain as depicted in Iroh 5. Iroh 6 then ends with Iroh encountering the thing that was encountered in the prologue, and we learn more about what exactly happened to Hamak by extension. Hyrule 6 is also a fairly curious chapter in that, on the one hand, it is an incredibly important chapter thematically. It has a lot of information about the world, it has a lot of information about Hyrule, things like that. But at the same time, Hyrule 6 is kind of filler. And if any one chapter needed to be completely cut or reworked from the Hyrule plotline, Hyrule 6 is probably the one on the chopping block, if not Hyrule 2. So there's this sort of balancing act where there are all these important things happening, but at the same time, the chapter is a bit superfluous. Still, there is a lot of things going on in this chapter, and it has been one of my favorite ones to write. And I personally think the chapter is rather important. So, to begin, as always, let us start with the epigraph. So this epigraph comes from Phineas the Younger's Creeds of the Known World, Book 1, Chapter 17. And this epigraph specifically is talking about the nature of death and what different religions in the world things happens to the dead. And this idea of the nature of death and the nature of change is a big theme in this chapter, as well as power and what one does and memory and the self and where does the self go exactly. All these things are present in the chapter and is exemplified by this epigraph. But here we learn that the Temple of the Triarchy believes that the departed enter upon Dios's twilight halls. The Navrians believe that there's instead an Isle of the Dead. The tribes of Harat, again mentioning this people to the north, say it's a veil at the world's edge, only reachable by the pure of heart. The Thesians agree with the Triarchy about it being somewhere in the earth, but don't think it's Dios. And then there's the Good Shepherd of Aram, which Good Shepherd, the dead reunite with their God. This is kind of meant to represent Christianity or some kind of monotheistic religion. And then there's this idea that all of them are correct, but reflect some kind of deeper truth or memory, which is a very comparative religious studies way of looking at things. But to use a more esoteric framework, this is a theosophical look at things, where each of these religions holds some imperfect reflection of some greater truth in a very Platonic sense. But we also get the idea that with this idea, it might not necessarily be a good thing. Anyways, in a world of darkness, the flame was Iril's guide. And here we also have this motif of where Iril's right eye should have been. Iril is very, very aware about his new disability. And it routinely comes up where Iril keeps on looking upwards at the place where he fell and starts equating his mind the fall off the mountain and the fall that happened when he lost his eye. And these are two distinct events, but in Iril's psyche, which is fraying, for lack of a better term, throughout this chapter. He is equating these two things in his mind as things that went wrong. In fact, later when we see the return to the ruin scene in Iroh 5, we get this conflation of trying to rewrite history or rewrite the past, and in preempting one tragedy, then preventing another. And none of this is true. However, talking about this loss of an eye, talking about Iroh and his grief, we also have this motif of gold and black, which we see at the end of the chapter just exactly what that means. Okay, So also the how only Muslim would reach the chasm where I was right I should have been is the word chasm should make us think of the chasm of the crypt. Essentially, Aeril has not only been physically scarred, he has been mentally scarred, and there is something that has abraded off onto him. And as seen by his conversation with the Lord of Blackbirds, that is very apparent in this chapter. I must not let the flame go out, and and then there's a shepherd's crook. This the motif of the shepherd, Iroh being a shepherd in the wilderness, around surrounded by wolves, thinking about life, the paths he could have taken. There's another big motif in this chapter, which is that, in a literary sense, this chapter is a recreation of Jesus in the desert being tempted by Satan. You have the shepherd in the wilderness at night and hearing being mentally vulnerable to things. So we'll get to that. But the fire is life, it is A in hand. And Iroh realizes that he's kind of stuck at the moment. How long has it been? 20, 30 days? 30. And confirmed with a glance at the red moon. So we know that the red moon takes 60 days for a full cycle, full to full, and the silver moon is our moon, which takes about 29. So almost 2 to 1, but not quite. He says, 30 days since my harrowing, since my fall. So the verbiage of harrowing and fall should indeed make us think of more biblical comparisons, with the harrowing of hell being when Jesus goes through hell during the days during Good Friday and Saturday in order to save the souls of the damned. And Iroh sees these days as essentially him being thrown through hell, hit with a cave and the water and nearly dying. And then that is also the fall from grace, the fall from heaven. So in this comparison of the fall and the harrowing, Iroh is both Jesus and Lucifer in this metaphor. The memories were clearer than a jumble, a whirlwind of thought and desire whispering atop the deep dark sea, only to break off the cliffs of eternity. The idea of deep dark sea, this is another reference to wine dark sea or Ornops Pontos, a Greek idiom used to describe the color of the sea at night, which routinely appears in Homeric epics. So, and then the cliffs of eternity as this sort of otherworldly thing. And now the dot 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 signals, we are now in a new time period with new characters, new setting. And Iroh is in a cottage in his day. And you have this is a bit of a joke. It's like, oh, you had quite the fall. Do you remember? So this is the joke. This is a joke that none of the past things were real, when in fact, no, they actually were real. So it's playing off the joke of fall. What do you mean X? What do you mean Y? Come on, we're gonna be late to the festival. But no, all of this actually was real. And then it hits Iroh, and Irol's memories aren't entirely right. You have the void it returned from the void it returned, um, more of that darkness imagery, but the fall, the coming to, his arm, his broken body, the prince's laughter from on high, even though that was something Iroh saw in the mind's eye, did not actually see. So there's the conflation of the real with the imagined, the cave, the well, the waters, the elder with a familiar voice. Again, the conflation of what is real with what is imagined. Blood on his hands, the goddess beneath the silver moon. And then finally culminating in the jumbling of real and imagined memories, you have this, which is the memories of someone else. Or is it the memories of Iroh? Because blood on his hands, he remembers thinking about someone dying in the previous chapter, but he also then is thinking about the blood of the rabbit which he killed. And he says, am I dead? And then there's another person who is knitting. And Iroh is now thinks he's dead and is found by women, one of whom is knitting. This is very much a idea of the three fates, but there's only two fates. But still the idea has gone across that Iroh has the is Iroh's story over? Has his life been fully knitted? Has the thread of his life been severed? Is he dead? Is he alive? And he isn't sure, especially with that. You're being awful flirt, a flirt with Lady Death, a lady with the gem cheek sortira. He says, my eye. And then that again comes back, and we have fingers burned and scabbed. The burned fingers is a curious thing as well. With the burned fingers, Iroh doesn't really have burned fingers. He had scabbed fingers from when he fell, but the burned fingers are the fingers of his grandfather Arl Argent. And there's the conflation of Iroh's sense of self, where he's thinking of himself as Iroh, but also himself as Arl, because he's now at this point reliving Arl's memories, which is whereas where it's been hinted at in like Iroh 3 through Iroh 5, in Iroh 6, this chapter is said very, very explicitly, Iroh is reliving the memories of his grandfather. However, Iroh also spent several days around fire, and that his fingers might actually genuinely be burned. So where the memories of his ancestor is manifesting into his actual body now, further making this conflation between what is real and what is imagined, or what is real and what is real in a different sort of reality. So he reached for his heart, but only to grasp at nothing. He's grasping at his necklace, which is not there. Exclaimed that went quiet as that to reemerge. That is the memory of losing the necklace. Edmund, blaming Edmund for losing the necklace, even though this is misplaced. We know where the necklace went, and it was taken by Lucian. Iroh never lost the necklace during his fall. So trained healers work, no doubt. The one replied, how did it happen? Whereas the first woman is comforting, the second woman is very to the point. And here we get the women's names, Pity and Mercy. And whereas this chapter is incredibly allegorical, Mercy and Pity's names are also incredibly allegorical. Pity is something associated with the cycle of grief, and Mercy is something associated with death, the gift of mercy, if you would. And Pity and Mercy, in fact, very much represent these ideas of cycles and death, the continuation of life versus the cessation of life into stagnation, into death, into things being still versus things being moving. And part of this with Aeril talking with them is based off this one legend of Hercules, where Hercules is confronted by a good spirit and an evil spirit, and is basically has to choose, is he going to be a good person or is he going to be a bad person in his life? And here we have that. We have something similar, which is life and death, and the good and evil, that sort of thing. But even the woman who's knitting Mercy, she has a bundled stone over her lap, which suggests that she's injured in some way, and that the injury is persistent, that they know how to deal with this, which in fact is true. It's some kind of menstrual pain related to a poor constitution or a previous miscarriage. So Mercy the boys just will give it a moment as you wish pity. And then he thinks of the ringing chimes of the Great Temple Fair Calais, thinking of how he needs to get back south to kill Edmund. Here, take this. The water's warm, smelling like dried sage and barley. Sage and barley are both associated with being health foods both like then and now. Against lips seemed right, but he was chosen in lieu of poppy or willow because remember, Iroh spent 5 years training as a rook. He knows medicine. He knows poisons. He knows history. We, in fact, get a list of the things Iroh is good at in Lucian 2, and one of them is medicine, or basically how to cure illnesses and things like that. Found you 4 days ago. Well, one of the flock did. Must have been fate. Led us right to you. It did. So Iroh being found in a cave by a sheep. This is another Jesus parallel thing. Then you have a broken wrist, a twisted ankle, and hurt on the inside. I'd, we weren't sure if you were coming or going until last night. Note, these are not Iroh's only injuries. Iroh also has a concussion, but they aren't aware of that. But of the wound to a hand, the wound to the foot, and the wound to the internal organs are also the wounds that Jesus gets on the cross. Keeps on coming back to that. So we weren't sure you were coming or going until last night, and then apparently Iril's condition stabilized. It says you saved me, that we did, and your horse. And now with the acknowledgement of Iril's horse, he's like, I have got to go. I have things to do. But naturally he's in no condition to ride. He's in no condition to ride at all. He says, "What's south?" And he says, dot, 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 fair Calais. Iroh's considering whether or not telling the truth, and he decides ultimately to tell the truth. But he doesn't say it's my enemy, which is the Prince Edmund. Well, fair Calais can wait, but he's out, you need to rest. And then we have tell to me, which is a linguistic quirk of the story. Instead of tell me, it's tell to me, giving the impression that this is again a translated work. What do they call you? We paused for a long while, unsure what to say until the memory faded beneath the sounds of yellow flames. And now we're back in the present, or at least the present. Auril, so you call yourself Auril. And the fact that the flames are cracking at his voice is interesting because previously the old man speaks of Eggman's voice in the vision. Aeril has an Aeril 5, which are the memories of Auril Argent. And Aeril, in this conflation of the memories and not knowing who he is in fact going by the pseudonym of his grandfather. So it's all very, very coherent. You called yourself Auril, I called myself Auril, and that he is now going to call himself Aeril, or that he does not need to call himself Auril because he is by himself. And then the winds are laughing at him. And who the winds are, we will later see that this voice is the Lord of Blackbirds, which is some voice in his head. So we don't really know between the voices that sounds like Egenhand and the voice that sounds like the Lord of Blackbirds and Arl Argent. We don't really know which voices in Irel's head are his own, which voices are actually just Irel talking to himself, which voices are Irel's manifest insanity through his through getting his grandfather's memories, and if there is three, some foreign power which is exogenously speaking to Irel as if by a vision by a god, and we don't know what's what. So Irel clenched his crook. I didn't deceive, they needed a name, I gave it. You deceived her as you deceive yourself. Idar shall be a bear of your curse, which is his mantra meant to mock Irel. And we now get the idea with the confirmation that Irel is reliving the memories of his grandfather, that the daughter of Arl Argent is the person who's being talked about, which is either Shoshana's is either Shoshana herself or is the elder or is some elder sister of Shoshana who died, who's not in the picture. So no, what daughter would curse her? You answer me. And yet the fire was silent, memory of Egenhand departed, getting the idea that the voice of Egenhand is actually just in Irel's head. It is not some foreign entity. Closing his eye, the world again became a void, punctured only by dancing echoes of flame. So one half is behind his closed eye, half is behind the eye that is not there. And Darky felt for his necklace, his purpose, only to find it missing. And Iroh is literally and figuratively pathless. He doesn't know what to do in life, or rather doesn't know what to do here, and more generally doesn't know what to do in life. Didn't need to take it. I lost fairly. My greatest treasure, I destroyed her. This is again the conflation of the memories. It is somewhat implied in Iroh 5 that Arl Argent killed his firstborn daughter in order to prevent some curse that a daughter shall be a bearer of your curse, and Iroh, this is probably what this is because Iroh never actually refers to the necklace as his daughter. That's very strange. Or if this excuse betray your promise the world, the peace of the gods, and you squandered your training here amongst the sheep. Pretty self-satisfactory. And then if there's sheep, there are wolves. And that is why Iroh is here keeping the fire up, because he needs to protect the sheep from the wolves. He is the good shepherd. So what do you think of this, of me and the sheep? And who this is, we it's not sure, but we learn it's Egenhand. What does Egenhand think of the sheep? Although the other male figure who Iroh might be wondering what the sheep who might think of Iroh and the sheep is Iroh's father, which in fact we do get a cameo from Casimir Marula later in this chapter because they're both authority figures, both male authority figures in Iroh's life. So he knew the answer, but when exactly Egan had said it, he couldn't remember. Again, the breaking down of Iroh's psyche and the breaking down of Iroh's memories. He doesn't know if the memory is like himself or somehow some twisted way of Egan saying it to Iroh's grandfather, even though that timeline doesn't work. So And then we get he sat on a sea of off-white, speckled with shots of gray in the afternoon sun. Around them sailed a guardian raven black on oars of fur and patent bone. This syntax of he blanked for a blank with blank and blank and blank, around them blank the blank blank on blank blank blank. This is the syntax of the opening line of Iroh 1, which is also reiterated in Lucian 5. This is a new beginning for Iroh, and this is also a metaphor. So a sea of off-white, speckled with shots of gray in the afternoon sun. These are the pelts of sheep. Around them sailed a guardian raven black, on oars of fur and padded bone. This is a dog, a guardian of the sheep. However, Iroh standing in the middle of the ocean means Iroh is on an island, and the guardian is a boat, which is possibly sailing to the island. This is a metaphor to the Isle of the Dead, seen in the epigraph. Is Iroh dead? In fact, Iroh then wonders, is he dead? Or is the entire world a dream? He doesn't know. He asks if the dog ever gets tired, and he said, "Oh, yes, but never for long," or as your father called him, Naruthros. This is a really, really silly joke. Um, and the dog is in fact called Red Maw. We'll get to that in a second. So this is some mocking of pity of Mercy's father, which we'll get to, but me and the noble boy. They know Iroh is a noble because he speaks like one. Because Iroh knows High Norian, Iroh knows courtly manners, and Iroh, can't hide some of those things which he was raised around. And they know that Iroh is not like them. My father is only a knight, not a noble. This is a lie. But, if Aeril is speaking from the perspective of Arl Argent, Aeril's grandfather, this might not be a lie. Aeril's father might have just been a knight, but Aeril's father definitely is a lord. And you speak like one. That's not my fault. The name it means red maw. So what we get is that Ruberos is the name in Low Norian, where Naruthros is the name in High Norian, which in fact means red maw. And this is again going by some parallel that if Low Norian is Latin, High Norian is ancient Greek, or something even more arcane. And in fact, Nuberos means red, or rubeus is red in Latin, one of the many words for red. And Naruthros is a more syncopated form of the word red maw. Naruthros, for so red maw, red maw, it's all there. But there's another layer on top of this little reference because Red Maw is the translation of another dog, which is the wolf Karkaroth from the Silmarillion, whose name means Red Maw. So it is like several references stacked on top of each other. You have the dog named Red Maw, whose name is Red Maw, with the Greek and Latin of Red Maw, and is named after a dog named Red Maw. Okay, so anyways, how did this Red Maw happen? And when we met, we each had a dog, and they did as dogs want. And this mating of the dog mirrors the mating and pairing off of mercy and pity. You should have seen the look on my father's face as purebred and your whatever it was. In fact, and then this is again the metaphor for mercy and pity themselves, because mercy comes from a wealthy merchant family, and pity's parents were nobodies who were shepherds in the woods. Oh yeah, I should have mentioned that point. Mercy and Pity are cottagecore lesbians, and it's really funny. Just as a if you know, you know joke. They're cottagecore lesbians. Aeril is being raised by is being nursed back to health by cottagecore lesbians in the forest. Anyways, how did it happen? As you expect, a shepherd's daughter, wool merchants, whatever. More on this in a bit. It was years ago, 10 and 4, maybe 10 and 5. She strokes Pity's face. One day she came to town, and I just knew. Love at first sight. Very cute. He didn't approve. They rarely do. No, he didn't. We ran, isn't that right? So they eloped together. I mean, look, I was born Detian. So Detianship, here we get a return to the concept of Detianship. And Detianship is a interesting social institution because while at face value it's a mechanism to allow trans men and non-binary people to exist in society, realistically it's just a patriarchal system to facilitate ancestor worship. So there's this question of something which may seem outwardly beneficial is actually in service of the goal of the whole. and that debteenship should not be that in a really just society, debteenship would be something which is not forced on people for being a firstborn female child, but is a social status which someone assumes for themselves for their own actualization. And naturally, with Mercy's father being a up-and-coming merchant who is very ambitious, that was never going to be an option. And Mercy's rebellion exploration of her gender identity is mirrored by the rebellion and exploration of her sexuality and the choosing of her own life with pity in the woods raising sheep with her garden. It's all a wonderful story of self-actualization. So, and she died, he remarried, and there's this double standard of this that once her father got a male heir, Mercy was forced to adopt women's roles and then was married off essentially. And they cinched my neck, the betrothal necklace, clipped my name, Mercer to Mercy, but Mercy still has the name Mercy instead of something else because the point is self-actualization, and these things are complicated. We betrothed, we eloped, and then kept your name, I am who I am, which is itself, this is the marker of divinity seen in Exodus chapter 3, where Moses is talking to God. Um, so there is this would imply that Mercy's exploration of her sexuality, of her gender identity, of her actualization as a person, there is some kind of divine harmony in all of it. And that's beautiful. Your father, he died eventually. And your parents went with them, love is love, they said, so they didn't care. I had a brother, you see, there were thoughts of him being a surrogate father for Mercy and Pity's child, where if not Pity herself, Pity's brother. However, Mercy miscarried and wasn't able to bring the child to term. Then came the Tetramachy, and he went off for the wrong side. And Iroh's like, political things you still shouldn't support losing side in the Civil War. Mercy says, "We're in the middle of nowhere. Who's listening?" And Kaiso Fumin was a fraud, especially he was one of us. There's this idea that there are two Kaisos. There's the Kaiso who killed his father and was sent down the sky in a box, and then there's the Kaiso who leads one of the factions in the Tetramachy. And there's no guarantee that those people are the same person. Let Tycho North know, no matter how he silks and mournful crowds he wears, he has no more right than the rest of us, the right to power, the right to empire. He never returned, Merrick his name was. Your parents, they died. They died illness. So my sister and Aeril is now conflating. He says, no, not my sister, my mother, I'm sorry. We know that there's some weird thing going on with Aeril's head where he's thinking he's his grandfather, but this is also weird because not my sister, my mother, I'm sorry. We don't really know what Lady Shoshana looked like, but we know that Kanta, her daughter, looks like Shoshana's mother, um, Sammy Argent, which would imply that maybe Shoshana also looks like Kanta. So here we have the conflation of women in Iroh's genealogy, which will come up later as well. Sorry, don't be this way. We get to live only for each other, even if it's hard to get the sheep and all that. More hands are always better on the farm. They yearn for a sheep. And then we have this idea of the sheep yearn for a shepherd. Deep now they must know they cannot exist without us. And this is basically, oh yeah, we were talking about lesbians in the woods, college lesbians, and then we get slapped in the face and say, you are not immune to propaganda. Just because one comes from a background which is associated with a more nuanced way of looking at things doesn't mean that you can't be host to bad ideas. And the idea that the sheep need a shepherd is a pretty authoritarian idea. And then not with the wolves. And this is what Egenhand said about the sheep, which was one of the things he and Iroh must have talked about on the several days between Iroh 4 and Iroh 5. Not the wolves, for there are three and only three. There are sheep, there are wolves, and there are well-dressed wolves, which we call shepherds. The sheep know nothing but obedience to their stomachs and masters, which is a reference to Sallust. The wolves, their stomachs alone, and the shepherds have no obedience to neither, which means they are actually able to do things. And the idea that shepherds are well-dressed wolves is this idea that the powerful and rapacious think everyone else who's powerful is also rapacious, and that the shepherd needs to control the sheep, lest the other shepherds, aka wolves, get them. It's an incredibly authoritarian, incredibly nihilistic way of looking at the world. That there are the elect, there are the shepherds, there are the evil people, the wolves, and then there are the sheep who are simply in the game between shepherds and less reputable shepherds called wolves. The sheep are not the other team, the sheep are the ball with which the game is played. The rest are animals. Animals, the Akasmunda, and Iroh is also having these thoughts impressed into him. Animals, that's right. The sheep only exist because we made them, we domesticated them. They never could have come about on their own. And now that they're here, they need us to survive, which is, not maybe true. Wild sheep exist, wild goats exist, but this is Iroh being impressed by, like, the impression of Eigenhand's ideas, and ideas which may be just around in society being impressed upon impressionable youths. Iroh, again, is recovering from several injuries. He is incredibly emotionally distressed. He is mentally disturbed due to losing due to basically going insane by having his grandfather's memories. And he's finding himself in this vulnerable state, incredibly susceptible to dangerous ideas, which this is the tale of radicalization, which happens a lot in this sort of way where an inroad is found and then that does something to people. So yes, the wind whispered, this is the way of things. They yearn for a shepherd, as such is the right of the shepherd to choose which to shear and which to slaughter. The fire hissed and suddenly Arrow found a presence lurking in the void. And as with beasts, so too with men. The facade of just talking about sheep and shepherds and wolves is now further broken down and saying it is this explicitly, this is how human societies are also built. There are the sheeple, there are the wolves, and then there are the shepherds who need to keep the sheeple and wolves in line. So too with men, the shepherd must rule, and today his crook must be iron. If he is too soft, he will lose his flock to the wolves or to another shepherd. And this word, today, is pulling a lot of weight in this sentence. That the word today implies that this isn't just we are in a dog eat dog world where the sheep are owned by shepherds and there are wolves who will take the sheep if the shepherds are not strong enough. This is the idea that at some point shepherds weren't necessary, but today not only are shepherds necessary, but shepherds require increasingly high amounts of brutality in order to keep the sheep in line, in order to protect their flock as the wolves also become more and more adaptable. So through this justification, any any kind of repression is necessary for for the sheep, for the good of the sheep. And this is naturally a really messed up way of looking at the world. Today his crook must be iron. If he's too soft, he'll lose his flock to the wolves or to another shepherd. And then Aeril says, that's wrong. We are not animals. This metaphor doesn't work. Humans don't need to be controlled by an authoritarian government in order to live well, essentially. And then Aeril says that we're not animals, and the Lord of Blackbirds then twists Iroh's words and say, if we're actually just talking about animals and not men, and you insist that men are um categorically different than animals and categorically like of a better, higher being, then why not just let the animals die? Because if you say they don't matter as much compared to people, why not just let them die? And then the Lord of Blackbirds then teases Iroh and says, like you let the rest, I did not let the fires go out. And so now this is comparing the fire of Iroh's current duty to the fire of Iroh's ambitions. You could have left days ago, but you persist here with a sheep while the false shepherd gloats, which is Edmund. You let that fire go out like you did the rest. And the Lord of Blackbirds is this antagonistic figure in the Iroh story. However, we still have no evidence if the Lord of Blackbirds is someone is something just in Iroh's head, or if it actually is an external being, um, uh, talking to Aeril in a visitation. And of course, with this idea previously of Jesus in the desert, the Lord of Blackbirds in this metaphor is the devil, who is tempting Jesus, tempting Aeril with serving him and neglecting the role Aeril wishes to do. Although if right now the Lord of Blackbirds is just telling Aeril to give up. But in by telling Aeril to give up, the Lord of Blackbirds is also egging Aeril on to do what the Lord of Blackbirds wants, using a sort of reverse psychology. No, I didn't get out of my head. I'll go there, I'll kill it, I'm happy. Tell that to your ancestral throne, your medallions, your lovers, the novice, the betrothed, the one you met beneath the moon. You do not even remember her face. And Iroh says, even if I don't, this is true. Iroh feels bad about this. It is some way of getting under skin. However, the fact that the Lord of Blackbirds is bringing this up also means that the Lord of Blackbirds is in Iroh's head. That it might be some creature other than Iroh, but it's definitely in his head and has access to all of his memories, even the ones Iroh's not actively thinking about, which is really scary. I remember his face, I remember Edmund's face. That's all I need. Once I'm strong enough, I'll go south and I'll have my justice. It's not justice, but we'll go on. With whose power now that everything else has been stripped away, dot dot dot, back into the previous memories. Are you sure your father was a knight? Because, he was a lord. And then I think I should be able to see it. And he's not. He's very upset. And again, he sees the place where he had fallen, where he needed to return. Iroh has resolved to leave. He doesn't know when he's going to do it, though. Spends on the empty slot of heart, why do you ask? And because you 10 plants as one born to it. Iroh was never trained in gardening or in how to harvest vegetables. Is Iroh just naturally talented at it, or is Iroh getting skills from his memories of being someone else? We don't know. And the vegetables are small. Again, there's still a famine. There's still a famine coming, but they will be enough. Thought you were gonna help me. Mercy is not able to. And then it's the next menstrual cycle. Mercy is in a lot of pain. Old memory's not quite chthonic woe, but still bad. Chthonic woe, as previously established, is any manner of like very deleterious thing that's dug out of the earth. Might be important later, we'll see. Tell you, how do you know the right way to harvest? And then he says, I do what felt right. My father was a leader of men. This idea of having some kind of psychic or ancestral memory or like some strange insight how to do a specific task. This is very Dune, with Paul knowing how to wear the still suit without ever having been taught to wear a still suit. He says, my father was a leader of men and taught me how to lead myself as I would lead others. This idea that personal responsibility or personal discipline somehow equates to leadership skills is a very common fallacy and is also just generally not true. One can be a good leader while not leading a life of self-control. About this, the review from was fed. And then here we get words from Casper Marula. When I said the Lord's power comes to the land, I did not mean rooting around the crops and the herd animals, which makes us think of the previous whole thing about animals. Power does not come from blades of grass, nor more shafts of wheat or heads of cattle. And the idea of blade, so we have grass, wheat, cattle, agricultural products, but they are equated to blades, shafts, and heads, which are swords, spears, and maces. That's a So by saying it does not come from blades of grass nor more than shafts of wheat or heads of cattle, he is priming us to think that a lord's power comes from violence and the ability to enact violence on others, which is something that I think Foucault talks about. No, lord's power comes from the blood of his people and their connection to the land. This is this is very King Arthur, I am the land type shit. The health of the land is the health of the Lord, the health of the Lord, the health of the land. To rule wisely, to maintain this balance, that is justice. So in uh, in Lord Casimir's idea, justice is maintaining the health of the people, which is seen in each of his three children. To Kanta, the health of the people is turned into keeping the people safe. In Lucian's case, the health of the people is turned into making sure their material needs are met. In Iroh's case, it expands to a sense of cosmic justice. And or cosmic balance. And then in Fortuna's case, it means the people being free. That is the health of the land and health of the Lord. And this idea that the Lord's power comes from the blood of his people, this is correct. The political power does ultimately derive from the people who the power is exerted over because the people have the ability to rise up and depose the ruler. However, the specific calling out the blood of the people and the land, this is very fascist language. This is very authoritarian, very divine right of kingsy, and it shows that Lord Caspian, although he might be an astute political leader, is not a good guy. And this has rubbed off on his children in various ways. And in fact, to hit home that what Lord Casimir is saying is wrong and kind of bad is, and yet to him the words felt wrong. Aeril knows deep down that this thing Casimir is saying about the nature of power is wrong fundamentally, both on a moral and logistical way. So, how do you lead others in your mind? And Aeril says, I tell them to uphold the peace of the gods, to seek justice and do what they must. And this is a nothing answer. To uphold the peace of the gods means whatever could mean, whatever you want it to mean. To seek justice, we already know from all the POV characters that seeking justice has a very different definition for each of the people, and to do what they must. Again, this means nothing. Iroh basically saying, I would tell people to do as I say and to assume I'm right, which is not the right thing to say. They must. That doesn't seem awfully straightforward. Pity lampshading this. That and the peace of the gods isn't as certain either. What makes you say that? Because how can the gods have their peace if each isn't given their due in turn? And this should set off an alarm bell in your head because this is some capital H heresy. This is catering to Iroh's idea of divine balance, but does divine balance mean good triumphs all the time, or does divine balance mean evil or other non-explicitly good powers triumph sometimes? And Iroh says the peace of the gods need not be pursued in their temples, which is a callback to Iroh 5, I believe, or maybe Iroh 4. Essentially, this is when Egg and Hand is talking about how sometimes the peace of the gods is murdering people. The peace of the gods need not be pursued in their temples, which is like the spurring of Iroh to murder Edmund. Who said anything about temples? When Deer is trying to say that people have different needs, and when the temple of the gods won't have you, others may answer. This is always the case. Again, this is a chapter about indoctrination. And when one power will not have you, other powers might. This is indoctrination. He says, go on. And we learn about this other god named Myri the Gentle. So among shepherds, some of this stuff with another god who is the god of cosmic cycles, Myri the Gentle. And she's a canonically dead god made from the scraps of reality that are left over when Dios Caveira and the Prince of Beasts first emerged from chaos. And I know the moon Myri, the vision of the temple would scourge, the queen of corpses and dead god decay. Myri is this goddess of rot, pestilence, corpses, disease, mushrooms, decay, um, and also like life and new birth. So very, she has her pros and cons, but Myri's depicted as this dead woman on a throne. And though she is dead, she is able to speak, and it's very, very spooky. So as you score as a shepherd, as you ask him for easy birth and a steady harvest, while Vagan him on his horse, staring it down him, makes no such judgments, which I believe is a make no such. It's not searching up properly, but Myri the Gentle. Okay. Anyways, we are not here. We are down here, Myri the Gentle. Anyways, to continue on. So admit that then your rook was nearly left, and then he fell. When I fell, Hyrule is debating whether or not to tell them about the old man of the mountain being real, and he decides against it. And he says, "I'm going to the Weeping Tower," and then we said the spirits haunted by this place haunted by the spirits of Mel-Ur. And here we get the introduction of another evil god. Evil. Well, this one is like more objectively evil, because Male-Ur or as in like first, male as in evil, the first evil. Mel-Ur is a god of death, the cold, suffering, and the states of eternity. No wonder Mercy is the one talking about him, but he's a bad fucking god, the Lord of Chains. And he's a god of death, the cold, slavery, suffering, domination, stasis, basically things being cold, things staying the same forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And his main legend is that he polluted the Isle of the Dead with his essence. Guess what that means? Such that any who drank of its waters could never leave. Basically, like the god of the stasis pollutes the waters of the Isle of the Dead. So now, when people go to the Isle of the Dead or go to the land of the dead and drink the water there, they can't leave because they have that stasis in them forever. So in order to the rooks, this defilement then spread out, giving the seas their salty taste. I wonder what it was, and forever changing the order of the world. Essentially, this is a legend about how death came about. And so, according to this legend, essentially, you can read between the lines, but the legend essentially says that it used to be that back in the day, when people died, they didn't die for good, and that they could, after they died, they went to the land of the dead, but they could somehow eventually come back to the land of the living as some kind of reincarnation. What he did is that when people go to the land of the dead, they stay there forever now because in this sense, not only did he pollute the water of the land of the dead, but using this metaphor about how it makes the sea salty and that it corrupts everything, death, like death as a permanent concept in the world is an STI according to this language, according to the language of this legend. And frankly, I think that's a really fucking cool as like a literary concept that death itself is a disease which people are congenitally born with. They are congenitally born with a disease, and the disease says that when you die, you stay dead. And that's really cool in my mind. So you know the way. Yes, but you should not go. We need to stay here. We need more hands on the farm. And so you persist as one already dead, that he is in stasis. No, I say because they need me to watch their flock, or do you forget that part? And then we get the explanation where they went to town for medicine and they need to watch the flock. Is you forgets you who cherishes sheep while your betrayer yet lives. That you are focusing on nothing. You need to be a wolf, you need to be a shepherd. You're nothing, just some illusion from my dreams where you live the memories of your grandsire. And this is a big question. Is the Lord of Blackbirds real? Is it some external entity which is talking to Aeril, or is it a figment of his imagination? And we don't know. But if it's a figment of his imagination, it's a figment of his imagination that has a incredibly, incredibly deep lens into Aeril's psyche, deeper so than Aeril himself, maybe. And sure enough, he's like, oh yeah, it all makes sense now. I've been dreaming the life of my grandfather. And we get the wolf cry and dawn is coming. What about you? What are you? Purpose, your hidden fire, your secret strength, will you with you always since you first wandered from the light. And that, in fact, would be when Iroh went into the castle of the crypt, broke his arm, and eventually got the amulet of Black Sun. What it is, it seems that this thing, the Lord of Blackbirds, has been lurking in Iroh for a while, and only now is Iroh able to willing to listen to it due to the trauma of a willing heart and the open ears. That somehow the circumstances have changed, and now he can hear this voice, which, might be something in his head, it might not be. And will you go towards your purpose, or you starve rot amongst the sheep? Rot is very particular because rot is the word rot or sore, the choice is yours. And this is what Egenhan says to Iroh in Iroh 4. So this is again saying that the Lord of Blackbirds has access to Iroh's memories and is able to cite them, which is very spooky. He says, Iroh's when I went wide, he knows. You hunger for truth or power, and I cannot live on bread alone. This is again a reference to Jesus in the desert, and the Jesus says written that men cannot live on bread alone. And Aeril is saying, yes, I cannot live on bread alone, but now he's twisting those words to say, I need revenge in addition to bread. Never can the shepherd the lion, and the lion hungers, the lion eats. This is a line which will come back later. When dawn broke, Aeril knew what he had to do. Edmund could wait, but he needs to go find Egg in Hand. And sitting on a large rock, looking over the flock like the kingdoms of the world. This is like one of the final parallels to the whole Jesus and Satan allegory. And by Satan, well, in the third trial, Satan tells Jesus, "If you serve me, I will make you king of the world, king over all the kingdoms of the world." And Jesus says, "No." And here we see Jesus, Aeril, looking over the flocks like the kingdoms of the world, showing that he made the deal. He decided to serve the devil. Aeril succumbed to temptation. And he says, "When will you return?" "I don't know. Likely never." "Then go if you must. We ask only for one thing. Remember us." So Iroh goes some lines with Shai still being coy with him that in the metaphorical sense, when you sleep, it's because the goddess of sleep goes into your bed with you and things happen, and that is what sleep is, which is fun. And then he gets this memory of being his grandfather, which is when it's against barbarians or something. This will be important later, but essentially when they meet, it's Castamarula and Arl Argent. This is how the two of them meet. Iroh's paternal grandfather and Iroh's maternal grandfather. And presumably this, as we understand it, this lifelong friendship between Castamarula and Arl Argent resulted in Arl Argent um, uh, basically shacking up at Castle Ravencroft and the agreement that their progeny would marry each other, which means that Casimir and Shoshana's marriage is an arranged marriage, and we don't actually know if Casimir enjoyed his wife's company too much, though he did have 3 children with her. And when he mounted his horse, this found an easier task if he hadn't spent the past turn of the Red Moon tending to sheep and vegetables. Again, we have this idea of Iroh is gaining skills from his grandfather's memories, namely the memory of how to ride after dreaming of riding. Yet easy limbs are balanced by an uneasy mind. This is a golden line. Or his grandfather was in him. He's like, does this make him a necromancer? Very, where is the self? What is the self? And then Iroh finds the place where the ruin was in Iroh 5, and he sits down and hopes against hope that when he opens his eyes again, everything's gonna be fine. That not only will he have not fallen, it will have been a month ago, but he will have his eye back. And it's not true. He weeps instead. And then Iroh gets up, and this time he rides past the pass where the old man of the mountain was, and it's just him, and he rides the path made by another. Iroh is acting as if he's in control of his fate, but he is not. And then we get to the Weeping Tower, and we have this wobbling structure versus these niches that were like burial urns, essentially, or implied to be burial urns. And we have also these rivulets of wax, like a candle. It's all very cool. And he passes these um, uh, empty square buildings, treasury sepulchres. But the fact these buildings are square, it doesn't ma not match the beak-like wobbly structure of the Weeping Tower. So these were built likely by people who came to the site later for whatever reason to venerate it or because of the thing in the basement. And then thinks of being him there before in another life as his grandfather, and then he sees an illusion of his sister, and he says, "Not my sister, Kanta," which is this is really bad. Essentially, in this moment, Aurel Argent is taking over Iroh's mind and says, "No, that's not your sister, Kanta. That's my wife, or rather, not my wife. That's yes, that's um uh, my wife, Sammy Argent." Who that's my wife, Sammy Argent, who Kanta is a dead ringer for because Sir Miles tells us that in Fortuna 4, I believe. And Sir Miles had a crush on Sammy Argent but was never able to act on it. And then Iroh says, "No, that's not my sister, that's Kanta," because he thinks it looks like Kenta's grandmother. So this is essentially Arl and Irol's psyches battling for dominance. That it's not Kenta, but it looks like Kenta, but is Kenta. But the truth is, no one's there. And he says, "What's happening to Kenta is your sister, Kenta." When he looked back, she was gone. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm the one who's haunted. I look back to my grandsire now. He's haunted, and then I'm the haunted one, or maybe I simply gone mad, or have I died, and this is the world to come." Um, weren't we all just in a grassy field? Am I dreaming? Weren't we all just in a grassy field? Am I dreaming, or did we all die and go to hell without me realizing? I saying that's the idea. And then inside, down below, this is it makes Iroh think of the castle in the crypt. And here, this room underneath the tower is full of undulating stone that looks like bodies. This is based off like some volcanic feature where it looks like there are bodies in the volcano, in the volcanic slag. But this also is resembled like this one artwork about the gates to hell, I believe, or something. But essentially, there are thousands of bodies pressed into the stone, and this reminds us of the columns inside the portal, because at the end of the room where all the bodies are facing, in fact the bodies are bodies, maybe petrified or maybe sculpted to look like that, there is a tear in reality, a portal, a black surface with a single gold dot. And this is the thing that we've been building up to, something that could not exist and yet did. It is a portal. It is a place that goes somewhere else. And when Hamak Prologue found it, he wound up inside the portal and then found gods question mark inside the portal and they killed him. And this architecture around the portal is reminiscent of the architecture inside the portal, and this motif of black and gold that we see everywhere is reminiscent of the portals. It is a cultural memory. This thing is so incredibly deep in society, and this is like, oh this is what this is going on. It is something that could not exist, yet does. It is a portal. It is this anomaly in the world. And then what happens when you go through it? Do you die? Do you wind up somewhere else? Both. Do you get killed and do you get replaced? We don't know. But it is there and it is magic and it is there's so many questions. In fact, Iroh thinks about all these questions and more. There are there more how many more portals are there? We've seen two so far. Are the one at the Whipping Tower, the one underneath Green Navria. We've seen what happens when you go into the portal. We've seen cultural ideas of the portal wind up in a lot of places, of things about caves, things about black and gold, things about of people going into the dark. We have all of these things about the portals, and now we understand why. Because there are portals in the world, and they go places, and we don't know why. And there is a glove in front of this one, and it is Egg and Hand's glove, and it says "Go in." So Iroh goes in because there is no other way. Iroh passed into the dark. He abandons the light of day, goes further into the cave, into the dark, into the portal. We don't know what's going to happen on the other side. And that is the end of the chapter. That is the end of Iroh 6. It is one of my favorite chapters in the entire story. And next time we will go to Fortuna 6, which is I like Fortuna 6 as well, a lot as well. But Iroh 6, goddamn, I'm very, very happy with this chapter. Anyways, I will see you all later and take care. Bye bye.